On June 21, 2025, the United States launched a direct attack on Iran's nuclear facilities.
Some time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime.
After months of growing tension and failed diplomacy, American warplanes struck key sites deep inside nuclear Iranian territory. This was not just another strike in the shadows, this was a declaration of open confrontation. Iran has responded with fury, vowing revenge and activating its network of regional allies. For the first time in years, the world is facing the real possibility of a war in the Middle East that could pull in powers far beyond the region. But this crisis didn't begin in 2025. To understand how this war became inevitable, we must return to 1979, the year the Islamic Revolution redefined Iran's identity, upended the Middle East, and began a confrontation with the West that continues to shape global politics to this day. Before 1979, Iran was one of the most Western-aligned countries in the Middle East. Under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the nation experienced rapid industrial growth, urban development, and a cultural revolution that brought Western fashion, cinema, and technology to Iranian cities. The Shah was a close ally of both the United States and the United Kingdom. Western oil companies operated freely on Iranian soil, and American advisors helped shape everything from Iran's military to its universities. Tehran was booming. In many ways, Iran looked like a rising regional power, modern, secular, and forward-facing. But behind the gleaming buildings and oil wealth, many Iranians felt left out. The rural poor, the religious class, and the working class believed their values were being stripped away by a westernized elite. The Shah's regime silenced opposition through SAVAK, a brutal secret police, and used oil money to strengthen his grip on power, not to share it. Resentment simmered. In 1979, a massive wave of protests swept across the country. Millions took to the streets demanding the end of the monarchy. The Shah fled. And in a stunning reversal of history, the people welcomed back a man long thought to be a fringe religious figure, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini rewrote Iran's destiny. The Islamic Republic was born, a theocracy where religious clerics ruled above elected officials. Iran had turned its back on the West and on the modern world it once embraced. Khomeini's new regime saw itself as the vanguard of a broader Islamic awakening. It vowed to export this revolution across the Muslim world to dismantle Western influence in the region and to destroy Israel, which it viewed not just as a rival state, but as a colonial implant. The revolution of 1979 was more than a transfer of power. It was the ignition of a long ideological war, one that still burns across the region to this day. To understand why Iran sees Israel as its sworn enemy, we need to go back even further, decades before the 1979 revolution. The story begins in the early 20th century when Jewish immigrants fleeing persecution in Europe began settling in Palestine, then part of the Ottoman Empire, and later under British control. For centuries, Muslims, Christians, and Jews had lived on this land. But waves of immigration, driven by the Zionist movement's goal to create a Jewish homeland, began to change the region's demographics. Tensions grew between Jewish settlers and the Arab population, who feared displacement from their ancestral lands. In 1947, the United Nations proposed a partition plan to divide Palestine into 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab. The Jewish leadership accepted it, the Arabs did not. In 1948, when Israel declared independence, war broke out between the new state and its Arab neighbors. During that war, what Israelis call the War of Independence, and Palestinians call the Nakba, or Catastrophe, over 700,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes, hundreds of villages were destroyed, families were never allowed to return. Israel won that war, and in doing so it occupied more land than the UN originally allotted. The West Bank came under Jordanian control. Gaza went to Egypt, but the Palestinian people were left stateless, scattered in refugee camps, living under occupation or in exile. To much of the Arab and Muslim world, Israel was a foreign settler colonial project, backed by Western powers, imposed on the heart of the Islamic world and built on the ruins of Palestinian homes. By the time of Iran's Islamic Revolution in 1979, these wounds were already decades old. For Ayatollah Khomeini, the very existence of Israel was a moral crime. It wasn't just about borders, it was about justice, faith, and the fight against what he called Western imperialism in disguise. But Iran couldn't defeat Israel on its own, so it built a new kind of army, an invisible one. Through militant groups like Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and later Hamas, Iran began a long war of attrition. a war fought with rockets, tunnels, and ideology. A war where Israel was always in the crosshairs but rarely knew where the next strike would come from. This was Iran's strategy: empower the oppressed, arm the radicals, and surround Israel with fire. And over time, that fire has only grown more dangerous. For years, Iran followed a familiar strategy: train, fund, and arm proxy groups across the region, then let them bleed Israel through 1,000 cuts. It was slow, indirect, and deniable. But that rhythm started to change. Starting in 2021, tensions in Jerusalem and repeated confrontations around Al-Aqsa Mosque sparked renewed rocket fire from Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. These groups launched thousands of rockets into Israel territory, triggering devastating Israeli responses. But then came October 7th, 2023, a day that changed everything. In a move that stunned even Israeli intelligence, Hamas launched a full-scale cross-border assault into southern Israel. Militants stormed towns, took hostages, and killed over 1,000 civilians. It was the deadliest day for Israel since its founding. The world watched in disbelief. For Israel, it was the darkest day since 1948. And the response was just as historic. Israel launched a full-scale military campaign against Gaza.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
Not just to retaliate, but to destroy Hamas completely. This wasn't a limited operation, it was a campaign of annihilation. Block by block, Gaza was reduced to rubble. Apartment towers, schools, hospitals all became craters in the sand. Over 35,000 Palestinians were killed, tens of thousands wounded. More than half of Gaza's buildings were destroyed or damaged. Entire neighborhoods simply ceased to exist. Israel said it was eliminating terror infrastructure, but critics across the world accused it of waging a war against civilians. Gaza's population, trapped, starving and displaced, bore the brunt of a conflict they had no power to stop. And as Gaza was being wiped off the map, a chain reaction began to stir across the region. From the north, Hezbollah opened a second front, firing guided missiles and attacking Israeli outposts. In Iraq and Syria, militias backed by Iran began targeting US and Israeli interests. In Yemen, the Houthis launched missiles into Israel, showing a level of coordination that couldn't happen without Tehran's blessing. Iran denied direct involvement. The Middle East was slipping into chaos, and Israel, now committed to a long and bloody campaign, found itself not just at war with Hamas, but with an entire Iranian-built shadow army attacking from every direction. And now, as Israel began openly targeting Iranian officers in Syria and assassinating high-ranking militia leaders, the question was no longer if Iran would respond, but how and when. Over the past 2 years, the Middle East has burned quietly. It was a shadow war, cold, calculated, deniable. But behind that smokescreen, the real threat was never the proxies. It was the one thing that would change the balance of power forever: Iran's nuclear program. By early 2025, international inspectors had been locked out of key Iranian facilities for over a year. In February, the IAEA confirmed that Iran had amassed over 270 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, far beyond what's needed for civilian energy. By May, that number had risen to 408 kilograms, enough for at least 9 nuclear weapons if enriched further. Iran wasn't slowing down, it was accelerating. For Israel, this wasn't just a red line, it was existential. A nuclear Iran meant deterrence was dead, and Iran could shield its proxies under a nuclear umbrella. And for the United States, a nuclear Iran spelled the collapse of decades of non-proliferation efforts. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt could be next. The time for diplomacy was over. Now it was time to act, and act at best, before it was too late. On June 13, 2025, Israel struck first. On the night of June 13, 2025, just before dawn, Israeli fighter jets crossed into Iranian airspace. Dozens of advanced F-35I stealth jets flew deep into Iran, coordinated with satellite intelligence and cyber disruption units already on the ground. Their targets, Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The strike was fast, precise, and overwhelming. Within minutes, multiple Iranian radar systems had been jammed. Enrichment halls were reduced to rubble. Explosions lit the sky over central Iran. It was the largest Israeli strike on Iran in history, but Iran didn't take long to respond. By June 14th, Iran launched over 80 ballistic and cruise missiles toward Israeli military and civilian targets. Sirens wailed across Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Beersheba. The Iron Dome and Arrow missile systems intercepted many, but some made an impact. Casualties were reported, The war that had been simmering for years had now fully exploded. The final tipping point came on June 17, 2025. 2 American soldiers were killed in a missile attack on Ain al-Assad airbase in western Iraq. The US responded immediately. On June 21st, B-2 stealth bombers flying from Diego Garcia struck IRGC bases in Kermanshah, Mashhad, and the outskirts of Tehran. Cruise missiles were launched from destroyers in the Persian Gulf. The Pentagon officially confirmed the United States has entered direct military conflict with Iran. President Trump addressed the nation, calling the strikes a defensive necessity to protect American lives and regional stability. But the region wasn't stabilizing, it was falling apart. Russia's government has issued a dire warning, saying that the Middle East is plunging into an abyss of instability and war, and urging a halt to further strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. China, too, has sharply condemned the US bombardment, calling it a dangerous escalation that harms Washington's global credibility and risks spiraling the region out of control. Amid these warnings, Iran has vowed swift and harsh retaliation, that the US and Israel must now expect regrettable consequences for their actions. What comes next is anyone's guess. The world today navigates a knife edge.